In the ever-changing world of healthcare, are you looking to get advice and learn to prepare for healthcare challenges that you may face? Come join a conversation about all things healthcare and wellness with your hosts, Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Monsi Shaw.
Welcome to the Healthcare Corner, everyone. And Guillermo, it's great to have you back in studio. How are you doing today?
Oh, great. I'm happy to be here. It's good to see your face. And, I, as much as I enjoy being out and traveling and doing things, I kind of miss my routine. I miss being here in the studio. I love this hour.
Absolutely. And Dr. Shaw, great to have you on as well. We're looking for another great episode today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. Let's dive in.
For sure. So as you know, if you're a frequent listener to the Healthcare Corner, we talk a lot about sleep and nutrition and exercise and really how we can have a better quality of life and be proactive about our healthcare choices and that sort of thing. And so today we want to talk about something that usually is spoken about at the beginning of the year when we're talking about commitments and that sort of thing. But we wanted to dive in and talk about obesity today, Guillermo, and what is it, define it, and really understand and demystify what it means, that label, and how we can change it.
Yeah, it's funny that you said obesity and then looked at me, because I do, under, the guidelines that our government or our institutional issuance is, I am obese, right? I have a BMI.
Me in a mirror, buddy. Me in a mirror.
33 to 34, so I would be considered obese. And this is something I just had this funny conversation not too long ago, about a week ago. And somebody was talking about now how, everybody's so politically correct and you have to, use the right pronouns and be really astute as to what people are feeling and what they identify themselves with. But apparently obesity is one of those things that, even though some people it could be a four-letter word, it's politically correct. You can say, look, you're obese, right? And the problem is that even though it's politically correct, some people obviously don't see themselves as an obese person. So it could be offensive, right? Some people might be like, hey, wait a second. I'm just a little big boned. I've heard that.
I'm pleasantly plump, right? Thicker, right? all these great terms that I've heard over the years. Yeah.
I think the important thing is to really define this, because I think the reason for a lot of this confusion is that we don't really understand what it is, as some of these terms seem to the definition seems to change and vary, from sometimes social situation to socioeconomic situation. People just think that certain norms are okay. But more importantly, let's define what obesity is, and then also let's demystify what it means to be obese. And if you really don't like that label, how do you change it?
And I think we've got a wonderful guest here today that can help us dive into that a little bit deeper. And so, Monsi, would you introduce our guest to our audience, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. So today we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Brittany McCoy, who likes to be called McCoy. And she is a PharmD, MBA, and Master's in Clinical Nutrition candidate, which will graduate from next year. And she is an entrepreneur, and also she's a medication therapy management expert, wellness advocate, and a business coach, and a mompreneur. She has a brand new baby, which is almost a year and a half now. But still, it's pretty young, for her to be doing all these things, and an international best-selling author as a co-author in the multi-author book. So welcome, McCoy. We are absolutely honored to have you. And I know you're all about evidence-based and science-based, so let's talk about all of that today.
Awesome. Certainly. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Shaw. Certainly a pleasure to be here, and I definitely appreciate the opportunity to kind of just share some information. And so, sure, let's dive right in. So I just kind of took the time to just kind of look up what is obesity defined as by the Obesity Medicine Association. And this is a quote here. Obesity is a chronic, relapsing, multifactorial neurobehavioral disease wherein an increase in body fat promotes adipose tissue dysfunction and abnormal fat mass, physical forces resulting in adverse metabolic, biomechanical, and psychosocial health consequences, unquote. So, guys.
Holy moly.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack there.
That is very intense and lengthy.
Yeah.
that was one sentence, and that was the definition from the Obesity Medicine Association. So this is something that a lot of times people take for granted, and just by listening to that definition alone just really speaks volumes as far as, the different impacts that this condition may have on others.
Yeah, I mean, that's, and like you said, it's a mouthful. It sounds pretty intense, sounds very involved. And most of us, even people who are trained in medicine, I don't believe always take into consideration all the dysfunction. I think that's the key word in what you said. It's the dysfunction that this condition, happens to evoke in every single one of our systems. You're talking about our nervous system, right? Our metabolic system, our endocrine system. Mm-hmm. All these things that are involved that are now dysregulated and causing all this, basically wreaking havoc across our bodies. So why is it though that, people, even though they're obese, they don't feel each one of these conditions, or do they?
So it kind of depends on the situation. So to kind of further elaborate a little bit, so let's kind of talk about adipose tissue dysfunction. So adipose is just another word for fat, essentially. So in addition to storing calories as, triglycerides, so those adipocytes, the cells within the fat cells, they essentially secrete large varieties of these signaling pathways. And so when there is dysfunction, those molecules actually impact vascular function, immunity, bone metabolism, and neurological function. And so, even though people may think, more so on the outside appearance, but there's a lot more internal things going on here than what meets the eye, if you will. So I kind of want to classify the BMI or body mass index, so that somebody understands, what exactly is obesity? How do I know if I'm obese or just overweight or what have you? And so there's these classes where essentially a normal BMI is a 24.9 or below. And so somebody who is overweight but not obese, their BMI is between a 25 and a 29.9. So someone who is a class 1 or low risk obesity, they have a BMI of 30 to 34.9. If they are class 2 or moderate risk obesity, they have a BMI of 35 to 39. And then class 3, which is a high risk obesity, that BMI is greater than equal to 40. So it's important to understand that somebody can also be overweight and not necessarily obese. I kind of wanted to make that distinction real quickly as well.
I appreciate you bringing that up, McCoy. And I'm a taller individual and have always felt like the BMI is slighted against us, right? That when you're 6'3" and that you're a little bit heavier, maybe you're built like a lineman, that those numbers are less accurate because you feel healthy. But where is the science behind that, and why do insurance companies and other people really stick so closely to the BMI?
Sure. So just to kind of be transparent, once you're in a position to test something, provide some sort of therapy, and even retest, you're able to monetize. And, when you're able to test, you're able to think about like a report card, right? When you brought home an A versus an F, that emotional response, whether it was positive or negative, the fact that you're able to tie in those responses, I personally think that is one of the biggest reasons why they monitor this. But essentially, what the BMI is, it's essentially calculating a person's height and weight ratio. So essentially, and for people that might not know how to measure their BMI, there's all sorts of calculators on the internet, on Google, that they can go and literally type in BMI calculator, and they could literally put in their height and weight, and they're able to measure their BMI as well.
But Dr. McCoy, maybe you could tell our audience just what that formula is. It's very simple, right? So what is exactly that formula for the BMI?
Sure. So originally it's in kilograms, which is we typically measure our weight in pounds, but it's kilograms per meter squared. And so that is the basic formula, which is the BMI, but there's also ways to calculate that in pounds per inches or per centimeters based off of your height as well. And so, again, a lot of people are not necessarily mathematically savvy, so you could also go online and put in one of those calculators. Literally, it'll convert your pounds to kilograms, or there's also calculators that does measure your pounds by inches or centimeters as well.
Yeah. And, to me, it's always been very interesting. Gavin brought up a great point. He was talking about how based on that BMI, because it's a function of weight and height, but sometimes it doesn't give you any idea of what the body composition looks like. And, we know that varies across individuals, because, we used to do a lot of waist to hip ratio and then a whole lot of other measurements. And I know when you're looking at overall health, from a physician standpoint, not only do we look at BMI, but we also say, particularly for men, consider more abdominal obesity versus, we have different shapes. I remember, if you guys recall, hearing apple shaped versus pear shaped and how that, right? So for men who carry more weight up in their upper chest and their abdomen, it seems that it's more of this fat, because we all have to have fat. Let's set one thing straight out there. So if anybody's listening, fat is something that we need in our body to function. But when it gets overwhelmingly, large, that amount of fat, like you said, it's metabolically active. There's hormones. There's all these things that are being dysregulated, so it causes dysfunction. But for men, typically when we have a lot of fat up in our upper chest and our abdomen, that means that a lot of that fat's depositing around some of these vital organs, and that causes a lot of problem. So we look at different types of fat depositions to see really what the health of which health specifically, or which aspects of health are being affected. And that's for men and females.
So you bring up very, very valid points. So that leads me into wanting to mention one other thing. So the BMI calculator does have its faults and areas where it's not so accurate, right? So let's kind of talk about that. So the BMI calculator, it's not for people who are muscle builders or long distance athletes or pregnant and lactating women, elderly women, and even young children. So that once you break into those special categories, that's where the BMI is not so appropriate and not as accurate. So I kind of wanted to just kind of point those things, that there are limitations to this calculator in specific. So
I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think on the other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about that and answer a question that I've always had of also just size of like animals, and why bigger animals live a less amount of time than smaller animals, that sort of thing. So we're here with McCoy talking about obesity and all things healthcare related here on the Healthcare Corner. So don't go anywhere and stick with us here on the Healthcare Corner.
To learn more about being a guest on the show or to ask a host a question, go to hcshow.net or email the show at info@hcshow.net to get your questions answered on the Healthcare Corner. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Healthcare Corner with Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Mansi Shah. Welcome back to Healthcare Corner, where you're a part of the conversation with your host, Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Mansi Shah.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Corner, everyone. And today we're talking about obesity. And we always want you to join the conversation. Invite your friends to listen to the show. And you can always do that by going to hcshow.net. You can go to wherever you get your podcasts and download and like us and subscribe to our newsletter. So please, enjoy the conversation. Send us your questions and be a part of our ever-growing group that we have here on the Healthcare Corner. So you know that I love bringing in stats, everybody. And so when you look at prevalence of obesity among adults in 2020, and who knows what's happened since then because of COVID and an increase of probably people being more sedentary and not getting out as much or whatnot. But back in 2020, they said that the U.S. was right around 32.6% and the highest in the world as far as the prevalence of obesity. You look at Russia, and they're at 26%. You look at Turkey at 24.8%. And you start going down, and you look at Korea, and they're at 3.2%. So that kind of gives you the whole spectrum of where obesity is relative to BMI, and hopefully that'll get us kicked off in the right direction here, Guillermo.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, like you said, BMI and what we measure. But I believe that what you're saying, I mean, if you just look at those countries, it becomes more about resources and what's available, and also what society values. And we know here, I mean, for the longest time, not only in adults, but for kids. One of the reasons I went into medicine is because when I was growing up, I mean, I grew up a chubby little, probably obese kid if I measured myself back then. But I didn't understand why that was. All I knew is that it didn't feel good, right? And I think it's become more and more prevalent because, like you said, our society is a little bit more sedentary. There's a lot more video games, a lot more entertainment that's indoor sedentary entertainment than when we were kids. So, but I think the impact of this, the important thing of all this is the fact that we need to be aware of where we are, because it impacts our overall health and our quality of life from the time we're children. It doesn't start when you're adults. It doesn't start at 40 or 50 like us. It starts really when you're a child. So if you want to really get the most out of life, this is something that impacts early. So this would be a great segue into talking about, why having so much fat on your body or too much fat on your body causes problems. We've had shows already on diabetes, and we know that's insulin resistant, but and most people know type 2 diabetics are usually people that are overweight and have resistance. So maybe McCoy, it'd be a great time right here to tell us, hey, why does having an increased amount of fat or adipose tissue lead to insulin resistance?
Sure. So essentially, there's this vicious cycle, right? So let's say you have a high carb diet too often, right? That leads to hyperglycemia or increased glucose on a continuous basis. That leads to elevated insulin, which also leads to more triglycerides, for example, being stored in your fat. Insulin and triglycerides leads to insulin resistance. That also leads to leptin resistance. Other chemical messenger is increased, as well as inflammatory cytokines that leads to stress and fatigue and additional hunger. And so you get this chronic stress, right? And this chronic vicious cycle where essentially the message is not getting through. And so essentially there's these genetics, and there's these stress, and then there's these interacting systems that are all affecting how the signaling is essentially being promoted within our bodies. And then so we get this hyper secretion of different hormones, and it causes these behavior changes such as depression and fatigue. It causes neurobiological changes such as neurotransmitter alterations. It causes metabolic changes such as insulin resistance, like we're getting ready to segue into, as well as some immunologic changes such as reduced T cell response. So all these things are just going through this cycle that is just hyper, just in a hyper state where it's just operating outside of the normal ranges, if you will.
Yeah, and evolutionary wise, right? We grew up we were here in a world where it was difficult to get nutrients all year round. And I think that, so we become really, really efficient over time. Evolutionary wise became very efficient at storing fat. And because we were always preparing for that time of famine, right? But now we have access to fruits and veggies all year round because they come from different regions, right, where it's warm and nice, and we have access to meats and high fat foods all the time. So being always in this kind of state of storing, for lack of a better term, right? We're always storing all this excess energy, and because we have lack of activity, we're not burning it as much, so we're getting more and more fat, right? So, and the more fat we are, what you're saying is that leads to all those. I mean, basically a barrage of a landslide of all those neurochemical changes and things. But specifically, one of the biggest things that we've already had a show on this diabetes and this insulin resistance. It's probably the number one underlying cause of death, right? And that, I mean, talking about obesity, which leads to diabetes, which leads to all those other issues. Why is it that we become insulin resistant, however, when we start putting on weight?
That's a great question. McCoy, I wanted to kind of bring in something before you chime in. Isn't it like a carnivorous diet that we are actually pursuing? Like, it's a term that's actually coined now because of all-day carb diet and that was my little thing that I wanted to add. But go ahead, McCoy.
So yeah, Dr. Shaw, I think I know what you're hinting at here. So there's this term called obesogens, and so what obesogens are, they're in addition to our diet, obesogens, they're essentially chemicals that also influence or promote obesity in humans, animals, living beings, if you will, and so. This is like literally a legit term too. You guys could look it up. But essentially, obesogens are like things like where we have those, just the parabens and the cookware and all the chemical cleaning agents and the bad things in our personal care products and medical supplies and the microplastics. All of those things also are contributing to obesity and insulin resistance and the vicious cycle of inflammation and oxidative stress, just putting our body in hyperdrive and constantly going and not at a state where we can rest and digest. We're in this constant fight or flight mode.
You know, when you say this, I mean, I'm a little bit of loss for words, because we talk every show, we talk about all these different aspects of how our environment, and you know, when you say stress, I'm thinking not even just environmental, I'm talking about even emotional, how we're all everything's interconnected and everything affects every other system. So when you were speaking, you were talking about these obesogens, and we've talked here many times about this epigenome and how, you know, when you affect that epigenome, which is really due to chronic inflammation, and then now you're expressing these genes that normally aren't expressed, or maybe you're affecting pathways of neurochemical transmitters that are now normally not so hyperactive. And so in my head, it paints this horrible picture of almost like a chaotic fire happening, and like now everybody's just running for their lives, right? And this is what's happening maybe in our bodies as we you know, increase our BMI, as we increase the strain on our systems, right? Is that correct? Does that sound right?
Yes, that is.
Okay, so how do we know, you know, how do we know which obesogens we're exposed to, or is it just best to avoid all of them, or what are your recommendations for that?
Wow, that is a very good question, and there is, you know, no one correct answer, but something that I kind of do on my own is I had this app, the EWG.org, the Environmental Working Group. And so when you want to learn about the quality of your tap water, they have a tap water database. Every year they put out the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, where they talk about the fruits and vegetables that have the highest pesticides versus the ones that have the lowest. And so, for example, the Dirty Dozen, they have the highest amounts of pesticides in those fruits and vegetables, and therefore you may need to clean them a little more often. You may need to let them soak in water or apple cider vinegar. You want to take more precautions. You want to go organic where you can with the Dirty Dozen. So the EWG, they put out just constant databases and articles and guidelines as far as just environments and chemicals that are out within our environments. And so even like the tap water database, for example, you can put in your zip code and it'll tell you the quality of water in your area wherever you are.
That's really cool. Hey, and Dr. McCoy, you know, when I was growing up, I was a kid, I was super interested in this stuff, obviously, because I told you I was a chubby kid and I didn't like it, so I wanted to change that. You know, and everybody just, I mean, everywhere I looked, everybody just said, you know what, if you eat too much, you get fat. If you eat less, right? You just got to eat less.
Simple equation, right?
Yeah, it's a in versus out. Like, hey, you burn more than you consume, then you're going to lose weight. But, you know, as we talk, and obviously as my education improved and I went to med school and these things, I realized I learned more about these, exogenous obesity, which is people just consuming a whole lot of food, right? And then there was another term they used to say endogenous obesity. So obviously there's metabolic factors. If you have, like, say, a thyroid dysfunction or some other metabolic dysfunction that leads your body to just burn less calories and just deposit more fat. There's all these different reasons. And now you're talking about obesogens. So now there's all these other exogenous things that are actually leading you down that path. So here it's leading me to this question, how do we protect ourselves? Because now it sounds almost scary, like we're constantly under attack from all these different exogenous things that could lead to all these adverse effects. So when it comes to, okay, we can look at websites, right? We can look at improve the water. So it's accumulative, what you're saying. It's not one thing. Is we need to figure out how to live maybe a life of improved moderation, or a little bit more conservative in terms of what we expose ourselves to.
Yes. So one of the biggest things that we can do, like just on our own without spending extra money, is just getting our stress under control. So earlier I mentioned that, the chronic stress with that vicious cycle, right? So with the chronic stress, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is constantly activated, where you have these increased cortisols that ends up depositing into that intra-abdominal fat, increasing your waist circumference, for example. So stress is one easy way that we could just kind of get that under control to help minimize our risk of just obesity in general. So that is one of the biggest things, in my opinion, that we can do. Another thing is just diet and lifestyle overall. What, the things that we're eating, are we sticking to that whole foods rather than the processed foods? Are we eating raw foods rather than frying the foods? Are we baking it versus frying it? It really goes down to the basics.
Dr. McCoy, this brings me up a great thing. As we go into we come back from the break, we're going to get into hey, is it really dieting that is going to make a difference? Because we've all tried diets and failed. So maybe there's all these other factors that we can address that help us get to that ideal weight. So stick around.
To learn more about being a guest on the show or to ask a host a question, go to hcshow.net or email the show at info@hcshow.net to get your questions answered on the Healthcare Corner. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Healthcare Corner with Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Mansi Shah. Welcome back to Healthcare Corner, where you're a part of the conversation with your hosts, Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Mansi Shah.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Corner, everyone. And this is why I love the show. Every week I learn so much from our great guests and from Mansi and Guillermo. And this week is no different. I think back to previous episodes that we've done, like with Dr. Joe, and talking about our microbiome and our the garden that we have within us, right, and how to cultivate that. And so for those of us that don't know what obesogens are, and I wanted to look that up for us. And like McCoy said, they are foreign chemical compounds that are hypothesized to disrupt normal development and balance of lipid metabolism, which in some cases can lead to obesity. So it doesn't always lead there apparently, but it can. And two other things I wanted to bring up. When I was little, we had a microwave, and we actually had a couple microwaves, right? Because it was just easier to put in bottles and to just, get things out faster for our active family lifestyle. And my mom always said, don't put like plastic into a microwave. And the reason for that, I guess, is because of like obesogens. So what I read here is that BPA or water bottles, food storage containers, that sort of thing, if you heat them up, then they have these problematic chemicals that will then get into your food and cause more problems. So, and the other word is phthalate, which essentially is in toys, soap, shampoo, water bottles, baby bottles, all of that. So it's really important to read the label, understand what's in there, and hopefully potentially avoid these obesogens.
When we were kids, we didn't even know. Imagine our parents would feel like if they all of a sudden found this information.
Oh my gosh, my parents are going to listen to this over the weekend, and I know I'm going to have questions to answer here. So glad I have you guys.
Yeah, so that brings us to this really interesting topic to me. At the end of the last segment, we were talking about how changing your diet. So and it really stimulated something in me that was really interesting because, since I was a teenager, I tried all these different calorie restriction diets, high protein, zero carb, lactose free. I went on all these crazy diets, and, some of them really worked some of them worked too well for me, and obviously they were unsustainable. So they failed. But, I have a lot of clients and a lot of patients who we've tried different diet programs for, and as much as they really gave it their best, it just didn't seem to work. So, when it comes to really, dealing with obesity and maybe really trying to find maybe even not your ideal weight, but just the way that works that you can sustain, Dr. McCoy, in your opinion, what's the best approach in terms of from a diet standpoint for your clients, and what do you tell your patients?
So when it comes to my patients, I really, really dig deep and I get to the root cause. So I like to know a lot more of their history, whether they were breastfed coming up, whether they drink out of plastic bottles, how do they drink out of plastic bottles often rather than just investing in a good quality water bottle, for example. I ask them about their quality of living and the type of housing that they live in. Because, for example, the paint in your walls, they leak out lead, for example. So that could be another potential obesogen that could be contributing to, the obesity or whatever other issues that they may have, because obesogens cause more than just issues with obesity. It also furthers other conditions and comorbidities as well. But I really like to dig deep and just kind of learn more about the patient, their smoking history, drugs, if they've been exposed to any type of, just drugs, alcohol, secondhand, all those different things. All those things are also contributing from their diet and lifestyle, not just dieting. So a lot of times, we may want to go to the cardiologist for a heart issue, or we want to go to, a certain specialty for one issue. But a lot of times we forget to think that it is still one human being, it's still one patient, and all of these systems are still connected. Even, for example, a cavity could cause so many issues with your heart, for example. And a lot of times people don't value the fact that you could have one issue, but it could also affect many other organ systems or tissues in the body. And so, yes, dieting can or cannot work depend on the total plan for that patient.
Yeah. So when it comes to the most common diets recently, and we've heard this, and we've probably talked about it on the show. I'm sure we have, about different fasting methods, and when it comes to calorie restriction, right? We definitely had an episode here where we talked about that you don't really necessarily need to fast for days. You don't need to do a 21-day fast. You don't even need to do a full day fast. I mean, just doing intermittent fasting seems to have a lot of benefit. But when you do an intermittent fast, like I have some friends who just last week were having this conversation, and he said, well, I've been doing intermittent fasting for probably 2 years. He's like, I haven't lost a single pound. He's like, and I'll do 16 and 8, right? So that means that he fasts for 16 and eat for 16 hours a day, and then eats for 8 hours a day. And it turns out that for those 8 hours when he's eating, he doesn't stop, and it's just like he's consuming 24 hours worth of food in 8 hours. Right. So, I mean, the premise of fasting is to consume a little less calories than you would if you were eating all day. Correct?
Yes. So it's important to really, really ask open-ended questions and really, really make sure that your definition of good is my definition of good, right? Because it's still all subjective, and someone could say, yeah, I'm doing this diet, but, they might not be doing it exactly the way that you might have recommended as a clinician or a healthcare professional or care provider. So I think it's really, really important to really dig deep and make sure that you guys are really at, the same baseline, if you will.
And one of the other things that, I've had patients who, have come to me and said, we try to put them in this calorie restriction or intermittent fasting type of situation. And they say, well, you know what, doc, I don't know if I could do that because, I'm diabetic and I have to eat constantly or my blood sugars get too low and I just don't feel good. Is that a real problem, or is this something that's more psychological and they like to consume? And maybe if go ahead.
Immediately I thought about mindset. A lot of times people, we're in that victim-based mindset where we think we cannot when we just really don't want to, or we're not motivated enough to get beyond that comfort zone. And I think this is where it is very much important for a clinician, care provider, healthcare professional to really, really understand motivational interviewing. Because when you're able to understand a little bit of the psychology, a little bit about, asking open-ended questions rather than closed-ended questions. And there's this whole curriculum on motivational interviewing. But when you utilize those techniques, you're able to really, really get down to, the basis of why that patient is or ain't doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And one other question that really comes to mind with me is, if you are, doing all the right things in terms of, calorie restriction and really meeting those requirements to help you lose weight, is it possible to drop your BMI, meaning, and still body composition wise not be healthy?
So yes, this is true, because somebody could, for example, I could say I'm vegan, right? So some people will automatically assume that all I do is eat, pasta and spinach and, certain things like that. But technically I can only eat potato chips and still be a vegan. So I think this is where it's very much important to be specific and make sure, again, back to what I just said, being on that same baseline, because a lot of times we may think a word includes or excludes certain things when in fact it doesn't. And so, for example, a Mediterranean diet, in my opinion, one of the best diets, because it includes the periodic fasting. And it includes, so for example, three of the biggest parameters within a Mediterranean diet is overnight fasting for at least 13 hours. 2 days out of the week, you want to maintain less than 500 calories a day. And then you want to do 10 to 15% continuous caloric restriction, or in other words, fast, 10 to 15%. So those three parameters ensures that, for example, the example you gave earlier where you were saying he was eating enough calories by the time he was done with his fast to it be enough calories for the whole day. So, being specific on the parameters within certain diets is very key. I could say, do the Mediterranean diet, and the patient may think, okay, well, I'm eating the certain things within the diet, but maybe they didn't catch the point about the calorie restriction part or the overnight fasting part. So again, it really comes down to really being specific and making sure that the client or patient fully understands what that diet or lifestyle change really entails.
Wow, that is so detailed. Isn't it, Dr. Castillo? This is what the future of medicine should look like when it comes to catering to patient care and actually finding the root cause.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, everybody responds a little differently. So I could also imagine a situation where, you are dieting and doing everything specifically, to that meets your calorie restriction, but maybe you're exposing yourself to some of these obesogens or other
right.
environmental issue or factors that are leading to chronic inflammation, that are leading you to continue to maintain a certain body habitus because of their inflammatory response and because of their promoting everything we talked about, right? You're igniting certain genes to be exposed, or maybe you're resistant to insulin because of it. All those things can still happen even while you're losing maybe pounds, but body composition wise, you're still not at that optimal level. So your hormones aren't at the right level. Everything's not working as it should.
Yeah. So earlier you brought in one of your calls in previous weeks with gut health, right? So even with leaky gut, right? And I know this is one of Dr. Shah's biggest things. But so when you have leaky gut, right, due to obesogens and stress and all this other chronic inflammation, you could still be eating right, but your body is still not absorbing correctly, and it's allowing waste products and all these other bad things in because of the tight junctions are no longer tight, for example. So even though you could be eating well, the fact that you could still be dealing with something like leaky gut, and there are other conditions and things, around lines here, but your body could not be allowing optimal nutrition in.
McCoy, I love what you said earlier about motivational interviewing, and I think that obesity, like Guillermo said at the beginning of the show, was that, this is something that happens over your entire life. And so when we're able to really engage the patient and thinking about change by self-evaluation and readiness and that decisional ability to really change the way that they're looking at their health and wellness. These are all things I think we're going to be able to tie together here on the Healthcare Corner, our final segment. So thanks for bringing that up, and don't go anywhere.
To learn more about being a guest on the show or to ask a host a question, go to hcshow.net or email the show at info@hcshow.net to get your questions answered on the Healthcare Corner. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Healthcare Corner with Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Mansi Shah. Welcome back to Healthcare Corner, where you're a part of the conversation with your hosts, Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Mansi Shah.
Welcome back to the final segment here of the Healthcare Corner today. And McCoy, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. We've talked about obesity in general, obesogens, and just learning so many wonderful things, motivational interviewing techniques, that sort of thing. So for our listeners, we usually would have you share with them, how do they get a hold of you and learn more about all this great knowledge you have?
Ultimately, LinkedIn is the number one place that I am. You can find me at Dr. Brittany McCoy, MCCOY, on LinkedIn. Also, my email is dr.bymccoy, dr.bymccoy@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thanks. And we'll make sure that for all of our listeners that are subscribed to our newsletter, that will also be shared on our website at hcshow.net and in our newsletter as well. So we always have this incredible challenge to pack in all this great information in the last segment and leave our listeners with a couple of great ideas. So Guillermo, let's get going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think today we covered a great topic. Obesity for me is something that's near and dear to my heart. And, we see it everywhere. And you gave us statistics, Gavin, that showed us that our country is the most obese. I'm sure we haven't lost that title.
No, we're still
in the last couple of years. So, the key here is, what we're trying to ask everybody is, do you identify yourself as obese? Have you really taken a close look at yourself and said, am I obese or not? And based on those, those numbers, those BMI numbers that we gave you, because that's what we have to go by in this country, and maybe take a quick look at that and say, look, let me calculate my BMI. Let me look up and then look at yourself in the mirror and really see if you're happy with what you see in the mirror and happy with maybe that title. Because like you said, even it is politically correct, apparently, but it still could be offensive. And it is offensive to me. I don't like to think of myself as obese, but I guess I'm category 1. I'm low risk, but I'm still, my BMI is about 32, 33. I do go to the gym a lot. I lift a lot of weight. Obviously, I like to think
muscle's heavier than fat.
I like to think there's a lot of muscle, but I know there's a layer of some of that adipose on top of that. People always say, "Hey, how come you don't have a 6-pack?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's in the fridge. It's just behind all the leftovers."
That's right.
It's in there. So, but it's in time to think, get it out and really get after it. So if we can really take a look at ourselves and say, "Hey, I am in this category that isn't ideal," right? Or maybe it is ideal for you, and that's okay too. Right? But if you're not ideal, then, how do we go about changing that? And that's, I think, what we got after today is, it seems to me that on top of what we consume, that now I just learned, Dr. McCoy just told us that there's a lot of other factors that are actually affecting whether, we can be at our ideal body weight or not. So, for me, it's been very informative as well. But Dr. McCoy, if we really have these audiences out there now and they're listening and they now can look in the mirror and calculate their BMI and can say, oh, shoot, I'm obese, right? What can they start doing tomorrow immediately to start changing that title and start moving in the opposite direction and start working towards their ideal weight?
Sure. So let's start with exercise. So exercise improves insulin sensitivity and it reduces inflammation. So it is important to minimally exercise at least 3 times a week, and you want to at least do a minimum of 30 minutes a day. It's very much important. obviously the more the better. That's a minimum. So exercise is the biggest thing. So a lot of times I hear from clients, oh, I don't have time to exercise, and this really comes down to how bad do you want it? I can sit in my chair right now and I can do leg lifts. I can lift my legs. I can put a pillow between my legs and lift them now. I can pick cherries with my arms out right now by being interviewed right now. I can lift weights right here while I'm talking to you guys. I think if you really want it bad enough, you can get it done. So exercise is number one.
Yeah, Dr. McCoy, just to interrupt too, I read somewhere, and I think we've covered this, but it doesn't have to be all continuous. I think you can, I remember telling some of my clients, I said, look, if you're in a chair, if you work in an office 8 to 10 hours a day, once an hour or every other hour, set your alarm for 5 minutes and just get your heart rate going. Do like 5 burpees and then sit back down. If you do 5 minutes of getting your heart rate elevated and pumping your muscles, 5 minutes, 10 times a day, that's 50 minutes. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's doable.
Yep, there you go.
Yes, exactly. And it's really about that mindset shift and working from a state of abundance rather than scarcity. So, yeah, there's different ways to get it done. And I recommend, just doing some Googling or reaching out to some of your healthcare providers and see what kind of insights that they may offer you. The next thing is minimizing that stress. As we talked about, stress really provides additional oxidative stress, free radicals, inflammation to your body, and in excess, it just kind of puts your body in overdrive. So finding ways to minimize stress or even incorporating stress relievers. What makes you happy? Do you like to dance? Did you used to dance and no longer dance anymore? Can you find time in the shower to kind of play music and, just dance a little bit maybe? Find ways to incorporate it within your routine, but minimizing stress is a huge thing. Then another point, the third one would be just being more aware of your surroundings. So I gave you guys a website, ewg.org. You can look into your local databases to just kind of see the quality around you, to see where you need to buy organic, to see where you can make changes within just the quality of diet and lifestyle. So those are 3 big things. I could elaborate even further. If you guys are interested, definitely reach out on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to share more insights and more information on different things.
Yeah, we also talked about nutrition, right? We talked about dieting and different diets, but we also discussed how maybe, even though you've tried all these different diets and they haven't been successful, that it could be because of all these other reasons, like all these obesogens or other exposures, and obviously you just said stress. But there's some of those things that it's going to be unavoidable, right? We're not going to be able to completely remove some of these stressors and obesogens from our diet. So are there supplements or herbs or any other things that you recommend in your practice that could help kind of counteract this inflammatory process that's happening through these factors?
And Monsi, maybe we could start with you and then turn it back to McCoy.
Absolutely. That has been such a great conversation here. So adding to that, I use, I would say, a proven evidence-based whole science approach to weight loss, and I have seen great success. Just my last client on TR90 that I have recommended and got them started on, and I was an accountability coach with them, lost 12 pounds in 4 weeks, and it has been super healthy. And they get better sleep now, and they have more energy through the day. So we have a couple more pounds to go, but that was a mission accomplished, I would say.
Yeah, and Dr. Shaw mentioned PR90, which is a supplement that is sold through a company called Pharmanex. So, and in full disclosure, she is an advocate and works with that company. So if you want more information on that, you could always go through the website and Dr. Shaw directly's website and get more information on that, or reach out to her directly.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
And McCoy,
and then I'll hand it over to McCoy on how she evaluates her clients and helps them.
Sure. So in full disclosure, I too am a Pharmanex brand partner, and I do have clients myself on TR90. It's absolutely a wonderful supplement. So I think it's important to understand the quality processing behind the supplements that you choose, and whether it's supplements, botanicals, herbs, spices, etc. It's important to understand the purity, the validation, whether it's evidence-based, the certifications, the sourcing, where is it being sourced, and making sure that it is not adulterated and it's not misbranded. All those things are very much important, because it could be easy for a patient to kind of go in blindly to a Walgreens or a CVS and, okay, I'm going to go get vitamin E. But those things could have been made in someone's garage. I mean, just to be kind of straightforward, and it's not regulated by the FDA. So it's very much important that when you do go the supplement route, you do find a company who values integrity and sourcing and quality. So those things are certainly very much important to pay attention to.
And I think the other thing as a disclaimer, this is all great advice, and I think general advice for many of our listeners, but make sure that you're talking to your doctor personally, and make sure that any of the things that you hear here on the Healthcare Corner, that it checks with your doctor as well. And so I think as we're wrapping up the show today, I've learned that there's really no single factor or behavior that causes obesity. It's really personal habits, lifestyle, environment. I mean, everything that we've always talked about from our first episode, Guillermo, together, right? Sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management. So I think today's been a great episode on really kind of peeling back the onion a little bit further and really diving into all these different factors.
Yeah, I agree. And I believe now we should look at obesity, as Dr. McCoy told us in the beginning, as this incredible factor that leads to this dysregulation of all metabolic functions in our body, right? And also has a huge impact on every single system, including our nervous system. So once we see that now that we recognize that this is an issue and why it's important, then maybe we can really take an active role in defining ourselves and figuring out where we are so that we know where to go. And I think if we can get at least that today, then it's been a success. And for me, it's been very pleasant and very informative to talk to you, Dr. McCoy, and I appreciate all your information and wisdom.
Truly been illuminating, and we only have a couple minutes left, McCoy, but could you give us, our audience, maybe 3 things that they could do right now, starting today, tomorrow, to just get them going down the right path?
Sure. So high quality supplementation, definitely making sure that you're sticking to the diet the way that you're supposed to do, and just quality stress reduction, whether that be incorporating more exercise, getting better sleep, reducing stressors. All those things will definitely help with the way that you are approaching your plan for your weight reduction.
Monsi, any final thoughts?
It all comes down to proper sleep, I would say water, the quality of it, and nutrition. And then, of course, you want to look into some high-quality diet. As McCoy said, Mediterranean diet is my favorite for my clients. So I would kind of leave it up to that, because that's what we always preach here.
Yeah, everybody out there, thank you for listening today. I think it's a very important topic. As I've already mentioned, obesity is something that we don't ever want to hear as a label behind our name. But if we can recognize it and we can start doing something about it, then it's a positive. So for us, it's about being proactive and bringing you information that is up to date and can actually help impact your overall quality of life. So once again, we really appreciate you, and thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks, McCoy, for joining us, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
To learn more about being a guest on the show or to ask a host a question, go to hcshow.net or email the show at info@hcshow.net to get your questions answered on the Healthcare Corner. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Healthcare Corner with Gavin Wiswell, Dr. Guillermo Castillo, and Dr. Monsi Shah.